What would happen if Israel were to strike Iran's nuclear facilities? According to a classified war simulation that was held earlier this month, it would lead to a wider regional war and could draw in the U.S. and leave hundreds of Americans dead. In this simulation, the U.S. found itself pulled into the conflict after Iranian missiles struck a Navy warship in the Persian Gulf, killing about 200 Americans, and the U.S. retaliated by carrying out its own strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities. Now, all this is according to officials that are familiar with the results of this two-week-long war game, which was called Internal Look. And they spoke to the New York Times. It echoes the same warnings that we've been hearing from intelligence, military officials, but it differs sharply from how Israeli officials see it. In fact, Jeffrey Goldberg reported from Tel Aviv that Israeli leaders think that Iran would probably pretend this attack never happened and try to cover it up. Now, no matter which hypothetical you look at, should we really just be concerned that it's already gotten to this point in the discussion? Here to discuss it with me is Jamal Abdi, Policy Director of the National Iranian American Council. Jamal, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
I don't know, what do you say? The fact that we're already having war games playing out about this and these simulations, does that mean that it's kind of reached a point where it seems, well, like it's getting more real than just hypothetical?
It's definitely reached a dangerous point. I think that the fact that we're having these war games is actually, it's actually really positive, because we need to have an honest airing out of what war with Iran looks like, to understand what the options are. You know, we've had a systematic effort to take options off the table. They said diplomacy is not going to work. We need to do sanctions. Then we did sanctions. Sanctions aren't going to work. We need to do war. Now, finally, we're actually having a conversation about, well, there is no military solution. So maybe we need to go back to square one and figure out what the other options are to actually resolve this conflict instead of to perpetuate it and create this disastrous conflagration throughout the Middle East.
Are we really having that discussion, though? Because, I mean, and I know that he has to do this politically, but the one thing that the president does constantly say is that all options are on the table. We will not hesitate to use military force, but this is somewhere down the line. And he also, criticizes people and warns against loose talk of war. And so when you think of something like this coming out to the press, right, of course, these are always classified simulations. It's some official that decided to leak it. Do you think that they're putting out there for a reason to try to calm it all down?
Yeah, I don't think this is any coincidence that this came out. And this echoes what every military official that you talk to says about this. You go down the line, you can't find anybody who actually has gone to war or who would lead this war who is saying, yeah, this is a good option. This is a place where we want to be. So I think that this is actually, this is not a coincidence. This is the administration saying, well, look, this is what the military option actually looks like. This should be a tremendous incentive and a way to create political space for a diplomatic option, which is exactly what we're gearing up for. We have talks coming up in a few weeks, hopefully. The last time that the Iranians and the United States actually met at the table, there's intense political pressure in Washington to kill those talks, because we needed to go to the sanctions track. By presenting the military option for what it really is, this terrible non-solution, hopefully that insulates the diplomacy and provides some political incentive and space for those talks to actually go forward.
Let's talk about what the simulation actually resulted in, right? They say that if Israel were to attack Iranian nuclear facilities, then undoubtedly the U.S. would get pulled into it. And that's because the way that Iran would see it is that if Israel's doing something, the U.S. must be partnering with them. Is that obvious?
Yeah, the Iranians have said this. If we are attacked by Israel, we're going to consider it an attack by the U.S. Now, some may say the Iranians are bluffing. They don't want to draw the U.S. into this war. That's a reasonable point.
Do they even want a war? I mean, would they really want to have a war on their own soil?
You know what?
Might they not retaliate at all because they want to avoid it?
We don't know how they would play this, but we know that they would exploit it in the way that would best serve their interests. And so what a lot of people have said is actually the Iranians wouldn't necessarily mind having a military strike that, first of all, convinces the Iranians to expel IAEA inspectors. Okay, leave the NPT, leave the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and then go full force and actually do what they haven't decided to do yet, which is build a nuclear bomb for a deterrent so that they're not struck again. So those are two really bad options for us that I think this wasn't in the military solution, but every military leader who's seen this says, yeah, we go in there, we strike, we delay their program by a couple years, and then they actually make a sprint to the bomb, which is exactly what we don't want to see happen. So, and then the other.
You're giving them more incentive, I guess you could say, to do it. What do you think about this? What Jeffrey Goldberg was reporting to, that according to Israeli leaders, they just think that Iran would completely try to cover it up, and they use the example of Syria when Israel bombed Syria's nuclear facilities then, and they acted like nothing ever happened, so nobody knows.
I don't think that, first of all, this isn't a one-off strike. This isn't a clean strike. You're going to have to send in 200 bombers into Iran to try to take out those facilities. There's a question of even whether the Israelis can do that. Can they actually pull that off? I don't know how you hide something like that. That's going to be out there in the open. People are going to know it happened. And for the Iranians, I think one of their calculations is going to be we have to save face, particularly since this is a strike that wouldn't take out the program entirely. It would just delay it. The Iranians do need to have a powerful message that this cannot, you can't attack us and then not expect for there to be consequences, because then you get into this cycle of, then 2 or 3 years from now, Iran reconstitutes its program and it's now weaponized, and we have to go in again, and we have to go in again. And so for the Iranians to sit there with their...
Yeah, and that's what they've been saying, too. They've been saying, we will retaliate. Speaking of diplomacy, President Obama released a video out there, and we have a little clip of it, and so I just want to get your take. Let's take a look.
Because of the actions of the Iranian regime, an electronic curtain has fallen around Iran, a barrier that stops the free flow of information and ideas into the country and denies the rest of the world the benefit of interacting with the Iranian people, who have so much to offer. I want the Iranian people to know that America seeks a dialogue, to hear your views and understand your aspirations.
So this was a Happy New Year's message. It's not the first time that President Obama has done this, but do you think that it's more political this time around? He was going after Iran and saying that you live behind this iron curtain, that censorship runs wild, and that we're willing to build a deeper relationship with you as long as, your country is a responsible actor.
When he released this, it's not just talk, it's not just rhetoric, and this is really positive. He actually took an action today to lift sanctions on internet communication tools for Iranians. Because we talk about this iron curtain of repression, of internet repression in Iran that the government undertakes. But the reality is, because of sanctions, the U.S. actually helps facilitate that iron curtain. We don't allow certain technology to get into the Iranian people, and so we're inadvertently playing a hand in that. So what he did today was actually to say, we're going to lift some of those sanctions, not all of them, and there's a lot more work that needs to be done, but we're going to start lifting some of those so that we're not a part of the problem.
And how about, speaking of sanctions as well, then the State Department said that they decided to exclude a number, I think it was 10 European nations from sanctions because they wanted to applaud them and say they're doing a good job of trying to wean themselves off of Iranian oil. I mean, is that the way that these things work? I thought if it's a sanction, it's a sanction.
Well, that's the thing. The president didn't want these new sanctions, central bank sanctions. You can't do any business with Iran. They didn't want that. They got a waiver where basically if countries are cooperating, they don't get sanctioned. It's interesting to note, though, that there aren't any. China's not on that list. India's not on that list. And those are important actors to have on your side when it comes down to economic warfare with Iran. So we're going to see where that goes. Are we going to actually start sanctioning China and India?
Well, I guess we're just going to have to wait and find out. Jamal, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.